It's go time. It's always go time in the gallery. Hello everyone. So, welcome to the gallery for a presentation video about these two equivalent and very iconic secretary desks from about the year 1830. And now secretary actually comes from secretary, for the secret compartments inside of these pieces that such desks are rather famous for. But we'll get into that. And now the first thing you're probably noticing, though, is that we are sandwiched between two outrageously large armoires from the 18th century, regional masterpieces in solid wood, which very much differ from these more urban pieces typically associated with Parisian production, which are not in solid wood. They rather have a solid frame onto which has been glued various fine veneers, in this case, flame mahogany veneers. And so these pieces are going to fall into our repertoire of veneered furniture, fine domestic Parisian furniture, secretary desks, and then finally furniture from the Louis Philippe period. Now, the Louis Philippe period loosely corresponds to the duration of the reign of King Louis Philippe from 1830 to 1848. But it is during this time period in furniture history that industrialization occurs. And so because of this major shift in the way furniture was made during the Louis Philippe period, especially by the year 1840, we as collectors tend to focus more on earlier Louis Philippe pieces, such as these here, right about the year 1830, which were made in a way that is far more tethered to the late 18th century or early 19th century paradigm of art furniture production, and not the second half of the 19th century, let's say, machine factory-made paradigm of furniture production. And although these are not the rarest secretary desks that you're ever going to encounter, they are definitely very, very fine and very rare compared to most furniture from the past that we're going to encounter. Now, they do tend to be a little bit more common in the already very rare subset of period furniture. These pieces here from the 1830s tend to be a little bit easier to find because simply by the 1830s, improved tools and techniques allowed them to produce quite a bit more of these than, say, furniture from the Empire period or the Directoire or further back on into the 18th century. We should also remember, though, that this exact desk is conserved by the French Ministry of Culture's National Furniture Preserve, Mobilier National, because it truly exemplifies the height of the art of domestic furniture right here in the year 1830. And so that's a good sign. If we ever see anything that's identical to what's conserved there, it's a point towards collectability. And now, from a factual historical standpoint, we basically know that these desks date from about the year 1830, but it is convenient to be able to carefully remove or slide away the gray Saint Anne marble on this desk to find, of course, some unintelligible scribbling, some numbers which might have meant something to the maker, but then finally we're going to see the year 1831 with a 1 that's written a bit like a 7, that's how the French write, but we see that it's dated exactly to the year 1831. So here in 1830, at the very beginning of the Louis Philippe period, we are transitioning out of the earlier Restoration period of the 1820s. Now, Restoration furniture was renowned for having been some of the most refined in history in terms of its quality of execution, regardless of one's opinion on the particular style. And so here in 1830, the early Louis Philippe period is actually going to continue the use of this Restoration period design of a secretary desk, but here, unlike during the Restoration period, we're not going to see the use of blonde woods or the hyper-refined inlay that Restoration furniture is renowned for. We're just going to see the same design, the same overall form, and now we're going to see how the Louis Philippe period favors a darker, now flame mahogany with a little bit of inlay work on this desk, reminiscent of the inlay of the previous period. It is important to remember that the fact that these might be a little bit more common within a very rare subset of very uncommon furniture, that does not detract from their overall artistic value. Because we're also at a culmination in tools and techniques that allowed for this veneer work to be done with a level of refinement that is probably not going to happen again. The art of veneering in furniture history shouldn't be understood as a derogatory term. This was not some sort of cost-saving strategy, but rather a very artful way to access the decorative qualities of rare parts of rare trees that could otherwise not really be used. And so this technique begins when the Dutch find ebony wood in the early 17th century, and they realize that although this jet black wood is very interesting, it's not suitable for construction. And so they develop the technique of slicing the wood into thin layers, which could then be applied to frames built out of wood that was more suitable for construction. And so this ability to repeat that slicing process is what gave the maker of these pieces the ability to artfully match different identical veneers at different places across the facades of the pieces. With this wonderful flame mahogany, which seems to billow up and down the facades of these two pieces seamlessly like a flame. This piece seems to feature 3 plumes, and this one appears to have 2 plumes, but we're dealing with the same exact type of decor on both the pieces, just different variations of the same decorative veneer scheme. But this piece also opens by 2 doors at the bottom, which makes it a secrétaire en armoire, for how the bottom compartment opens by 2 doors like an armoire. And although this is splitting hairs, this particular model is considered to be a little bit more refined than the one here that has exposed drawers. And then also, the extra divisions here between these different compartments really showcase just how perfectly and seamlessly this grain has been matched across the front of the piece. And so both pieces actually have drawers which are sort of hidden into the bottom plinth or the bottom cornice of the pieces. And these drawers kind of respond or reflect the upper drawer, which is so artfully blended into this upper cornice, although these drawers feature much more conspicuous keyholes. And so speaking of keyholes, if we move inside of these pieces, we'll see that the leather-topped writing surfaces, the fall fronts, are accessed via the disengagement of a rather hefty locking mechanism, because after all, these pieces were intended to house and protect your private correspondences. Now that being said, secretary desks are also considered to be very versatile storage pieces as well. Since they have various compartments, they're rather amusing due to the secrets that we're about to take a look at. Now inside the pieces, we're going to see that the inner galleries, or the theaters as they are called, it's really a gallery of English drawers and a little shelf, but they're called theaters because opening these pieces is often quite dramatic. But we're going to see that this has been decorated, veneered, done in a maple, a beautifully striated golden maple, which artfully contrasts the darker mahogany of the exterior. And so this is a pretty common play on colors that we're going to see, just to add a little bit of contrast simply to the piece. If one wanted to blow the cover on all the secret compartments, the first most famous secret compartment is the spring-loaded one here, which you access simply by removing part of the top English drawer here and pressing a hidden lever, which allows the spring to be activated behind the drawer. Just came out a little bit, but now we have access to the secret drawer. And I would always recommend that you place your hand in front of the drawer before deploying the spring, before pulling the trigger, because, you know, sometimes you underestimate the power of that spring, and it is a very sad day when one of these 200-year-old drawers flies out onto the floor. But anyway, to reinsert the secret drawer, all you do is push it back until you hear a reassuring click. And that is perhaps the most famous secret compartment in a secretary. And I'm not so sure that these are ever secret, because the name secretary gives away the fact that there are secret compartments. This is perhaps more of a vestige of the overall wit and intelligence and just sheer artistry and entertainment that was this type of art furniture long ago, when people were very much interested in the quality of their furniture and very much proud to have furniture that was wonderful, multidimensional, and special. And so aside from the spring-loaded drawers, which both of these pieces feature, the next most obvious place to look for a secret compartment is removing this central drawer, under which there is often a small piece of wood which would cover that hole. But here we can actually see that the little pine flap has gone missing, and we see directly into the cubby hole where there's a disintegrating eyeglass pouch and an old pin. Nothing too interesting in this piece, unfortunately. So the next place that we're going to find a secret compartment is actually underneath the top drawer here, which is so beautifully molded into the sort of top cornice of this piece, by the way. But what we do is we just stick the key in here, remove the drawer entirely, and then underneath it we're going to see that there's a compartment that seems to be about 3 inches deep. And so this compartment is actually normally covered by a small pine board, a small pine cover, which itself would have a tiny little knob that you would then lift up. And so that would keep this whole compartment safe, such that if someone did remove the drawer, as we have just done, they wouldn't be able to look right inside and see that there's a massive hidden space there. But for some reason, those little balsa wood boards or pine boards are gone, perhaps because they're always so lightweight. But anyway, that's one of the places where we have a secret compartment. The one on the right seems to be a little bit fancier than the one on the left, although they really are equivalent models. The argument I would make for that is, to begin with, the absence of metal bars. The metal bars over there, which are actually so handy today, are considered to be a little bit less luxurious than the ones which were built with an internal mechanism that holds the writing surface up. It seems to me, though, that today, if one wants to use one of these nearly 200-year-old desks, that it makes a little bit more sense to have one with the bars, just for your own security. And so the inside of this piece is adorned with a little bit of inlay that the Charles X period is sort of famous for. We see that inlay on the inside of the piece, which is kind of a vestige of the Charles X period. The 1820s were really famous for the use of this inlay. And on finer pieces made during the Louis Philippe period, we're going to see this inlay on the outsides of the piece. But here it's just kind of a nice touch. And behind this central drawer, we see that unlike the other desk, there actually is no secret compartment underneath here. There are, however, the typical spring-loaded secret compartments, which we should take a look at. And I do sincerely hope that they will close after I release them. So there we are. We have one secret compartment. And so now the next thing that we're going to do is just pan over the backs of the pieces so that you can see some of the apparent doweling. You'll also see how the backs are left unfinished, how they're quite oxidized. However, we're going to see here a bit of a stark difference in terms of the quality and the refinement of the backs of these pieces relative to pieces which were made earlier. Because here by the year 1830, improved tools and techniques just on the onset of industrialization are making it such that now the backs of the pieces are becoming much more, let's say, flat, refined, attractive, and uniform relative to earlier pieces of period furniture made during a time when, let's say, finishing the backboards was such an arduous task they would not do it. So we kind of get the sense here that although the backs of the marbles are still left rough and the fronts of the pieces are certainly much more beautiful than the backs, we get the impression here that we really are on the onset of industrialization. We're entering a new world order, as a secretary desk such as this here in 1830 looks quite a bit different in the back than one made 100 years earlier, such as this piece from the 1740s. And I will add that you always want to lock the fall fronts when you're closing a secretary desk, because you just simply don't know if it's going to spontaneously open, and that's a very sad thing. With that being said, for this topic of two Louis Philippe period secretaries which are emblematic of this type of fine domestic furniture, I think we've pretty well covered the subject, and so I thank you all very much for your time. And if you'd like to support the endeavor of preserving digital traces of the pieces I encounter, please like the videos and subscribe to the channel. I hope this will be a place where people who could ramble even more extensively than I will be able to come and see whatever interesting period piece I may have found. You simply press it back in until there's a reassuring click, and, you know, you can hide your valuables from everyone who hasn't seen this video.